part of this special double episode of The Truth is Viral, exclusively right here on AboveTopSecret.com. My name is Bob Powell, and I would like to remind everybody that the views and opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of the above network or any entity or person other than myself. Now that the President has successfully killed his first American citizen without so much as charging him with a crime, I suppose the only question we have left to ask is who's next? Who is the next person, the next man, the next woman that so displeases the President that he feels that he can order their assassination without benefit of a trial? No charge, no jury, just the whim of Caesar Obama, standing between them and a Hellfire missile. Last week it was a man who was undeniably an enemy of the United States, even though he was once hosted by the Pentagon as a moderate Muslim that they felt could reach out to the Islamic community in the United States. Next week, it could be anybody. Personally, I think that President Obama wanted to make a test case out of al-Awlaki precisely because he was somebody that nobody's going to miss. Nobody's going to shed a tear over his death. Nobody except his father, that is. Nasser al-Awlaki today is mourning his son and his 16-year-old grandson, who was also killed in a CIA drone strike the week before. Right now, via Skype, I'd like to welcome my first guest onto The Truth is Viral. His name is Nate Wessler, and he's a National Security Fellow with the National Security Project over at the ACLU. The National Security Project handles the question of targeted killings by the U.S. government. Nate, welcome to the show. The questions that I have for you today have to do with your field of expertise, specifically the targeted killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, a New Mexico native. Al-Awlaki was never charged with a crime in the United States, other than soliciting prostitutes, hardly a death penalty crime. Yet the President felt it was within his purview to order his assassination without so much as the slightest congressional oversight or judicial review. Can you tell me what the ACLU has to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have very serious concerns about the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, as well as two other U.S. citizens in the recent weeks. And there are, I think, two overarching issues. One is that we believe that no president should have unchecked authority over the lives of U.S. citizens. It's not about Democratic presidents or Republican presidents. It's about due process. And our other concern is with transparency. We at the ACLU, as with all members of the public, have very little information about the legal authority and the factual basis for the government's claims that it can kill U.S. citizens using drones.
Nate, to the best of your knowledge, is this the first time that an American citizen has ever been specifically targeted for an extrajudicial assassination?
An American citizen? Well, certainly it's the only time that we're aware of since the September 11th attacks and using the fight against terrorism as an excuse. We know from reports in the press that there may be up to 2 or 3 other U.S. citizens who have been put on what are sometimes referred to as kill lists. So Anwar al-Awlaki may not be the only person who the President or senior members of the administration have designated as targets of a targeted killing attack. But he's certainly, as far as we know, the only one so far who has been purposely targeted because he's been on that list. Now, we do know that 3 other U.S. citizens have been killed in drone strikes since September 11th. There's a U.S. citizen killed in 2002, but the government asserted that he wasn't the actual target of the attack. And then in recent weeks, in the same attack as killed Anwar al-Awlaki, another U.S. citizen, Samir Khan, who grew up in North Carolina, was killed. The government seems to assert that he wasn't the actual target, but it's very hard to know until the government releases more information. And then just last week, Anwar al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son was killed in another separate drone attack, also in Yemen. So there are very, very serious concerns with the power that the government is asserting to put U.S. citizens on kill lists and then hunt them down far outside of active war zones and kill them.
As far as the legal options that the President could have taken, what would the ACLU consider to be an appropriate course of action?
Sure. Well, the United States has a fully functioning court system, a court system that is used every day to address serious matters, including allegations of terrorism. So if the government, in fact, had information that Anwar al-Awlaki was engaged in actual activity that was likely to lead to the deaths of U.S. citizens or others, or that he actually had engaged in that activity, then that should furnish the government with grounds to go to court, seek an indictment, charge him, and proceed to trial. And there are lots of examples in recent years and in the further past of successful prosecutions against people accused of terrorism. And really, without more information from the government, it's impossible to know what kind of evidence they had. If they had to go to court, they would have to produce evidence to the judge or the jury, prove their case, and then a verdict would be issued. Here, the government, the president, and those working for him seem to have taken on the duty of judge, jury, and executioner all by themselves. And without more information about the evidence they had, it's impossible to assess whether it was legal.
One of the reasons given by the government for not charging al-Awlaki was the fact that he was outside of the United States. Even though he wasn't in the United States, what could the government have done to bring him to justice other than just killing him?
Certainly the United States could seek a criminal indictment against somebody who's out of the country and then take measures to try to secure their capture and bring them back to the United States. Again, because the United States government hasn't released to the public any information about what happened, we don't know whether they even tried to capture al-Awlaki and bring him to trial. They seem to assert that they wouldn't have been able to.
The government has said that they had al-Awlaki under surveillance for 8 weeks prior to his assassination. Couldn't they have sent in a SEAL team, or better yet, recon Marines, to capture him and bring him back to the United States for trial? Was there another option available other than a targeted killing?
That's right, and that really goes to another concern, which is that under both international law and under the U.S. Constitution, there are narrow circumstances where the police or other parts of the government can use lethal force against somebody without going through a trial and a death penalty. But those are very narrow circumstances only if that person is posing an imminent threat of harm to law enforcement officers or other people. And we just have no evidence from the government that there was that kind of an imminent threat here. I think it's pretty uncontroversial if somebody's running down the street waving a gun, pointing it at civilians or pointing it at police officers. Police are allowed to use a weapon and shoot at that person to try to neutralize the threat. But as you said, the fact that al-Awlaki was on a government kill list for months or years, and that they apparently knew his location for at least some period of time, suggests that whatever threat he posed may not have been imminent in anything like that sense.
Another of the excuses given by the government for not charging al-Awlaki was that some of the evidence against him is classified. Is there any mechanism available for a grand jury or a FISA court to hear this type of evidence in a manner that would preserve both our intelligence capabilities and the Constitution?
Well, I actually think that regular Article III courts, the federal courts that take care of judicial business every day, they have adequate procedures to deal with classified information. There are statutes and there are court rules that allow the government to use classified information and to reveal what is necessary to the defense attorneys, but not to the public. And those statutes can be effective in balancing the need for justice against what can sometimes be legitimate needs for security and secrecy. But for the government to allege that it can make the determination about who's a threat and when they can kill them totally in secret, in some secret bureaucratic process without ever going to a court at all, is pretty disturbing and troubling.
The Department of Homeland Security has issued guidelines to determine who is an extremist. And these guidelines can be so broadly interpreted that anyone can be deemed a threat to national security, which would give the president the ability to order their assassination without anybody for counsel other than himself. For example, pro-life activists, supporters of the Second Amendment, and even folks who have a Ron Paul bumper sticker have been deemed by the DHS to be possible threats. The evidence the government has released consists of nothing but hearsay and mentions of emails and telephone conversations with terrorists like the underwear bomber and the forehead shooter. In the past week, I've spoken to the Iranian mission to the United Nations and traded emails with them myself. So using the government's own standard of evidence, using a secret process that nobody but the Attorney General and the President are privy to, I could be deemed a threat to national security as well. What does the ACLU have to say about the precedent that this sets when the President, with nobody but himself for counsel, can order the assassination of an American citizen without any type of judicial review or congressional oversight whatsoever?
That's right. It's a very serious concern. I mean, this is not a partisan issue. Today it's President Obama. Tomorrow it might be a President Perry or a President Palin or a President Clinton. Who can say? And for any president to claim unilateral authority without checks and balances to decide who's a terrorist and who can be killed without going to a court is very troubling. This sets a dangerous precedent inside the United States, but I think we should also be worried about the precedent that this is setting around the world. Drone technology certainly isn't limited to the United States. Many dozens of countries either have or are pursuing unmanned drones like the ones that the U.S. uses. And the U.S. Activity in Yemen and Pakistan and Somalia and many other countries we think could be setting a dangerous precedent. Who's to say that in a few years from now it won't be Russia or China or Israel or Iran that's claiming authority to send their drones into other countries or into the United States to target U.S. citizens without trial. And that sounds awfully dangerous to us.
You know, back in May, when I interviewed Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico, the state where al-Awlaki was born, he used those exact words, very troubling, to describe the targeting of an American citizen without a charge. I could go a step further. Matter of fact, I will go a step further and say that the president is guilty of premeditated murder. Other than impeachment, isn't there a mechanism by which a sitting president can be charged with felony?
Sure. Well, let me tell you first what the ACLU has been doing and is doing now about this. Our number one concern immediately is to get more information. Until we know who's making the decisions, how they're being made, what the evidence is, it's very hard to bring any kind of substantive lawsuit against the president or anyone else in the administration. So we are pursuing Freedom of Information Act requests and lawsuits, trying to compel the government to release information about what the legal authority is it claims for killing Americans and others with drones and other targeted killing methods, and what the facts are that make it think that it can do that.
Okay.
Now, as I'm sure you're aware, the ACLU brought a lawsuit on behalf of al-Awlaki, working with his father last year before he was killed.
Right.
And that was dismissed by the federal court, with the court was essentially saying that this wasn't a matter for the courts to get involved in. It was a matter for the executive. We are always evaluating what the potential options are for legal activity in the future. But we certainly are hopeful that the courts in the future will see this as an issue that, in fact, they do have a role in providing a check against government authority.
Hey, that was Nate Wessler. He's a National Security Fellow for the ACLU. Nate, thank you very much for taking the time to come on The Truth is Viral via Skype. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us on Above Top Secret. You know, the ACLU aren't the only lawyers that are concerned with this blatant violation of the Fifth Amendment. Judge Andrew Napolitano, host of the Fox News show Freedom Watch, is also adamantly opposed to the targeted assassinations of American citizens without a trial. Here comes the judge.
I can remember here at Fox arguing in the hypothetical whether or not the president could order an American killed, and everybody was recoiled at even the thought of it. Now, it doesn't even make the front pages. What about the Constitution? What about life, liberty, and property? What about the very obligations imposed on the government in the document that created the government itself?
Well, you've got to hand it to the judge. The man definitely knows what he's talking about. If he was here right now, I'd definitely give him a chest bump, and I would most certainly support his nomination as Attorney General in a Ron Paul administration. So what now? At the top of this segment, I asked the question, who's next? Now that the president has granted himself the authority to kill anybody that he alone deems to be a threat to national security, what does that bode for the future of our great republic? How far will Caesar Obama spread his reach? Will the judge be his next target? Will I? Do I have to look over my shoulder and keep a watch on the sky for predator drones? The question's not as silly as it might seem at first glance. Predator drones are already being used inside the United States to patrol our borders and provide overwatch of the major American cities.
Predator B remotely piloted aircraft. Usually it's attached to this: military operations watching or bombing remote locations in places like Iraq or Afghanistan. Or catching human and drug smugglers along the Mexican border.
Group is running.
Now it will be flying a much bigger chunk of the Canadian border too.
Now we have the opportunity to leverage technology with a very capable system to perhaps quantify where those crossings are or where those holes are in our northern border.
There's been a lot of...
Isn't there anybody, a judge, a congressman, a senator, somebody with the cojones big enough to put a stop to this insanity, this desecration of our Constitution?
The Due Process Clause to the Constitution states that no person, whether they're overseas or in the U.S., may be deprived of life, liberty, or property by the government without due process of law, which means a jury trial.
Before the targeted assassination of American citizens that have never seen the inside of a courtroom becomes so commonplace that when it's announced on the mainstream media that another one has been killed, everybody just says, well, hey, must have had it coming. I'm a nobody with a very small voice in the grand scheme of things. But surely there has to be somebody within the sound of that voice that can put a stop to this insanity and hold the president and his administration accountable for what I consider to be nothing short of cold-blooded murder. Well, that's it for this special double edition of The Truth is Viral. I'm Bob Powell, and thank you for watching me right here on Above Top Secret. Please tune in next time when the subject will be the overthrow of the Libyan government, the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi, and the increasing drumbeats of war for President Obama's next campaign against Iran. The Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Committee ought to be ashamed of themselves. Peace Prize my furry butt. I'm out of here. See you next time.
Smack, runner with me calibers.